All right, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. My name is Maren Brisson-Kuster, your current NC Realtors president, and I am happy to see you all again, even though it is virtual. And I'm giving you my friendly reminder, we are recording this session so we can share it afterwards. So just be forewarned, everything's being recorded today. And we are kicking off our fourth in our webinar series, which is Big Talks. We've introduced it this year, and I think it's a great way for us to help educate, inform, and engage you, my fellow brokers in charge, to really reinvigorate your relationship with the organization, and more importantly, help you educate, inform, and engage your brokers that you are directly overseeing. And that is why we're so excited about today's panel. We really, truly have experts speaking to us today, and I'm really looking forward to it. This is a topic that all of you are well aware of, fair housing, but we're going to dig into it. We're going to discuss what you need to know about it and how you can better manage your brokers in your offices, okay? So our panelists today are going to share real life experiences, real examples of fair housing violations, provide with some policy and procedure suggestions, right, that we may start to implement at our firms. And we're also going to provide you some resources for you and your agents to share after this. So with that, I'm going to get to it. I'd like to introduce our panel. So first off, we're going to have Brian Green, who's spoken with us in the past. He's NAR's Director of Fair Housing Policy. So thank you for being here, Brian. And then we've got Nate Johnson. He's a realtor and a board president of the Metropolitan St. Louis Equal Housing Opportunity Council. Nate's one of the greats, right, from NAR. I've known him for years, and he is a phenomenal speaker. And then we have our very own, our Asa Fleming, one of my near and dear, my most recent immediate past president from NC Realtors, and he will be rounding out my fabulous panel. So with that, we're really going to get started. Thanks, guys, for being here. And I want to fire off really quickly with you, Brian, very easily. Give us the definition of fair housing. Plain and simple. Start us off there.
Yeah, it's about non-discrimination. And it's defined under the 1968 Fair Housing Act, which describes the range of housing practices that the law covers and the bases on which you cannot discriminate. There are 7: race, color, national origin, religion, sex, families with children, and people with disabilities. And depending on the state or locality that you're in, there may be additional protections like sexual orientation or gender identity or marital status. But it more or less says you have to treat folks the same and that there are penalties for treating folks differently.
Pretty simple, I think, right? Although it's very complicated, as we all are very aware. So now we know really what the definition is. We took it to the base level, and that really told us why we need to stay on top of it, if you ask me. And it also told us we need to be aware of it and stay on top of it in managing our firm. So now let's get into what do we do in some of these situations? How do we discuss what happened and how do we avoid violations? So with that, I'm really going to punt it over to you, Nate, to get going. Can you give us a quick overview of the recent Newsday investigation that happened within the Long Island Association?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. North Carolina Realtors. It's great to be with you today, and hopefully you get some value out of our conversation. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so the Newsday investigation. So what happened in North Carolina, in Long Island, is there was a three-year investigation where about 100 realtors were tested, and what was uncovered during those tests was widespread discrimination and unequal treatment all throughout Long Island. And so what was determined was that about 19% of the time, Asians were shown homes in different neighborhoods than their white counterparts. 39% of the time, Hispanics were treated differently, and 49% of the time, Blacks were treated differently and shown homes in different neighborhoods. Now, what's shocking about that is when we really look at when we think about discrimination, housing discrimination and steering and redlining and those sorts of things, when we think about the steering, it is, that, we think that folks are, may not be shown homes in certain areas and may be shown homes in others, but this was rampant and it continues to be rampant. And this was, and what happens is that if you were one of the 19% of Asians, or the 39% of Hispanics, or the 49% of African Americans during this time who were looking for a home, you wouldn't even know that you were being treated differently. You likely wouldn't know that homes existed in the areas that were different than what you were being shown. And that's the real insidious part about this, is that there really isn't that knowledge in many cases that folks are even being discriminated against. So as a result, it's only when there are testers, or often only when there are testers, that we can really determine that there is this unequal and different treatment taking place. Now, when we look at Long Island, one of the interesting things about Long Island is that's the home to Levittown. And Levittown was one of the very first examples of suburban development when we go back to the mid-1940s, when all the soldiers were coming home from war. 1947. And what happened there is that this neighborhood was developed, this town was developed, and it was exclusive to Caucasian. They had restrictive covenants that prohibited any minorities from investing in home ownership or even being able to lease properties within those neighborhoods. And there was a severe housing shortage. So there were whites, blacks, everyone, Hispanics, Asians, who fought for our country coming home from war. But unless you were Caucasian, you didn't have an opportunity to achieve home ownership or even leasing a home within that neighborhood. So how that sort of perpetuated to today really, it really has a severe impact on what we're seeing and the outcomes that we see today. Because when we look at the price of the homes that were in Levittown, those homes were trading at about twice the median income. So they were very affordable. And in today's dollars, those would be about $100,000. Now, the challenge is that today, those homes are trading for 7-8 times the median income. So what that means is that home ownership opportunities are out of the reach for folks that weren't able to get in on the ground floor, so to speak, right? Because now those homes in today's dollars that were purchased for $100,000 are selling for $500,000 and $600,000. So unless you were able to get in there early, you may not be able to afford those homes today. And that's why when we look at the numbers for that community, we see that today less than, or right around 1% of the population of Levittown is African American, and over 85% of that population is white. And when we go and look at this Long Island Divided report by Newsday, it really shows some of the additional reasons why we see such segregation still persisting in this town. And one last point on this, and I'll shut up. One last point is that although this study, and this study was done in Long Island, I could say that this study could probably have been done in most of our local boards and associations all over the country. I serve as president of the Equal Housing Opportunity Council of Metropolitan St. Louis, and we see this all day, all the time coming across our desk. This is not something that is unique to Long Island. It is a problem that is persisting all across our country. So I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. And I mean, you really brought me into my next question for you guys, for all of you to ponder. What do you think the Long Island Association did right in their response to this investigation? Because I'd like to maybe focus on some right behaviors when this comes to light. Don't all of you jump on it. There you go, Brian.
So, I have to say the jury's still out, but I could say what they've done right is the association itself is working with partners in the community to make sure the community knows that the association is committed to equal opportunity, and it recognizes a problem. It recognizes that Long Island, just its geography, is one of the most segregated communities in the United States, and that it has a role to play in addressing that. So I think the association leadership has been building those coalitions and sending that message. I think there is probably a lot more to say still in terms of the cautionary tale here of what not to do that folks out in Long Island.
Well, and I want to dig into that too a little bit
Yeah.
as well, right? I
Yeah.
mean, so because
So I think the
clearly there's much
coalition
more
building,
that they
yeah.
could do better.
Yeah, yeah. So the coalition building of the association, I think, is key.
You know, I'll say what I think, and thank you so much for including me on this panel. It's good to be with you, Brian and Nate, just people I admire and have known for years. You know, the thing I'll say is I think what they did right was just by doing the test itself, by sending in those testers and providing the data. You know, you hear a lot of people who say, you know, we don't have that problem. You know, it's sort of, you know, swept under the rug and it's never sort of focused on. And I think the fact that they took the time to send in those testers, gather all that data and provide data was one of the things they did right.
Well, what do you wish they had done differently? I know there's a multitude of things. So let's think about, if you could think of the one act that you think was by far the most impactful and wish they'd done different, what would it be?
All right, so Newsday, news organization exposed this, and I think the question many people have asked is, what have the brokers done? And New York State, the Senate has conducted hearings on this. Of course, there are ethics reviews of individual agents. The state attorney general is investigating these companies. The New York State Senate, for example, called the brokers to hearings, and none of the brokers, one broker came to the first hearing. The second hearing, they had to subpoena all of them. So, if these companies, individual companies, have a good story to tell, they should tell it. I commend the one company that came forward to that first hearing and talked about the issue and its commitment to fair housing. But these companies are not dealing with it forthrightly. They're exercising, of course, their due process, or the due process of the agents. But from a culture change perspective, we need to see companies step forward and talk about the problem and demonstrate, if they have a defense, what it is, and otherwise demonstrate that they're addressing the issues.
Own it and be better, right?
Yeah.
True story. All right. So our association has placed an extremely heavy focus on risk management, right, for our members. And it seems like a lot of areas where we might need to be more aware of our actions are really in this arena, how we can violate fair housing. So can you give us some examples, real life, of fair housing violations, what they may look like, and even maybe covering some recent hot topics in the industry, you name it, steering, advertising violations. Let's just dig into this a little bit. Pocket listings, that's a big one. Love letters. Let's just dig in, y'all. And who wants to start? Why don't you start, Asa? Start us off this time.
Well, I have so many that I have personally experienced, as far as people, neighbors buying the homes at more money and then selling them to who they would prefer to be in the community because they don't want a certain person of color or whatever to be in that community. I've experienced that. Just a myriad of things. But one of the things I do want to share on this panel is something that happened that I experienced about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago. And it was something that was unprecedented in my 22-year career, right? And I can't believe I even experienced it. And so I had a client who had, wanted to build a home. I referred him to another agent to work with him in that home because I didn't really service that area and I wanted him to be with someone who was an expert in that area. And, you know, he's building the home, you know, it's in a predominantly white neighborhood. You know, I don't even think there was another Black family in that neighborhood. And so, you know how clients would do, they would go by the home and check on the home. So if I could share my screen here, I'm going to share this with you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm out with I'm doing something. I don't know what I was doing that morning, but I get this through Facebook Messenger from one of my clients. Well, the client I referred to the other realtor, and it says, on another note, I don't know if everyone can see this. I'll try to get on another note. I went by to check on the house. They weren't supposed to frame it until this week coming. Looks like they've already started. But I was driving from the race last night because he's a race car mechanic. And my friend wanted to see the location of the house. As I drove up, look what I found. I have been up most of the night trying to come up with a rational reasoning behind this, but I can't. I don't know what Poochie means, but so to just give you an idea of what this is, he walks into his house. There's a monkey hanging there with, I think it says Poochie. I don't know if there's some sad attempt at saying either Pookie or Poochie. So immediately, you know, he's upset, I'm upset, everybody's upset. We schedule a meeting. What is this? And we show the picture because the next day when we went there, it wasn't there, right? But luckily, you see, he took a picture. You can kind of see a silhouette sort of in here of him taking the picture, right? And so I talked to the agent. The agent is like, look, there's no way, you know, this is me. I can prove it's not me. Talk to the builder. We sit down. The builder's like, it's none of my subs. It's not me. And so we, you know, this guy, he's upset. You know, he's like, who is it? So the realtor came around and showed me a email that said, from one of the neighbors, okay, and that said, you know, we really don't appreciate you bringing in undesirables. So now we're faced with, well, how do we address this? You know, this is obviously something that's, you know, if it's not somebody that's part of a trade, you know, organization or some sort of trade, what do we do? And so he went to his attorneys. He wanted out of this community. He didn't want to live there. There was absolutely, because it was a neighbor, we could have pursued it, but the attorney, you know, was sort of like, you know, a little bit of a stretch. Don't know if this was where they were sort of trying to keep you out of the community, and it really wasn't the realtor, it wasn't the builder, not sure what to do. And so this guy ended up going ahead with the building the house, and he moved within a year. Another part of the email was, you know, we see all these desirables driving in and out. They even mentioned 2 women with dreads. And the one woman that had dreads was this guy's mother. The other woman was my wife, who kind of helps me from time to time, checks on things and sort of documents the building of the home for the clients. And so these are things that are real life examples of what you experience. I have a bunch of them, trust me, but this is one that really permeated my soul because I couldn't believe that someone would take the time to go and maybe they had this monkey or purchase a monkey, go into this guy's house and nail this up into his framing, and just to send a message to him that he was not welcome in that community. I commended the realtor. You know, of course I was upset at the realtor at first and the builder, but I commended the realtor because he didn't want to show me that email. But when he said, I assure you it's not me, I'm going to prove it. When we got there, he showed me, he said, even though I received these emails from the residents, I still, you know, brought this guy into this community to build this house. So you cannot say that I am breaking any type of fair housing violation, doing anything, but I can't speak for the people that are around us. So that's one example I'll give. I appreciate you allowing me to do it.
Yeah, and you know, you know what you bring up there, Asa. You know, when we look back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, we saw this, you know, this real overt discrimination and racism, where you would have signs that say, we want white tenants in our white community, no blacks, no Jews, no Irish, you know, things like that. You would see that. And so everyone knew where they stood. But when we look today, that racism and that discrimination still exists. It's just covert as opposed to being overt. And that's one of the things that we really have to come to grips with as an industry, is that this is rampant. This is widespread in most of our associations all over the country. And, I'm certainly sorry you had that experience, Asa, but it is indicative of what we see and what we don't see, meaning that you don't know the houses that a client isn't shown because of the neighborhood that it's located in. Because we as realtors sometimes will make the mistake of doing what we think is in the best interest of the client. Because sometimes the decisions that we make, it's not overt, it's not conscious that we're doing this. It may be, oh, well, they're going to feel more comfortable in this neighborhood with the best interests of the client in mind, how they think. But what is happening is that the realtor is not allowing the client to make the decision. We as realtors have to provide the choices and let the client make the decision. Similarly, if you've got someone with a disability or someone with small kids, and you're only showing them first floor condos as opposed to the condos that are on the 5th floor with the balcony, because you wouldn't want your kids to have access to that balcony. So you make the assumption that someone else doesn't want their kids there. We have to let them make those decisions for themselves. That's a violation of the Fair Housing Act by doing something like that. So we've got to make sure that we're staying on the right side of that and just allowing them to make the choices that's going to be best for them and their family. Another place where we get caught up is when a client asks us, well, I just want to be in a good neighborhood. You know what that means. Or I want to be in a safe neighborhood. Those sorts of things. We as realtors have to have responses to that. Because if we don't know what we're going to say when those situations arise, then we could find ourselves falling on the wrong side of the fair housing laws. So we have to be prepared for this. So what I would say is just education, training, role playing with your fellow realtors about situations that come up, and so that you're prepared to respond so that you don't get caught. Because it would be very easy to say, oh yeah, well here, I'm going to take you over here. This is a good neighborhood, or this is a neighborhood that I think is good. And we all have different definitions of safety as well. And so that's the fundamental reason why we shouldn't be telling people what a good neighborhood is versus not a good neighborhood. But at the end of the day, if we're not prepared with the response for that, then we risk falling on the wrong side of fair housing laws.
Yeah, I echo what both of these gentlemen have said. I think one of the areas where agents are often or too often steering is when it comes to schools. And this is an issue that we're taking on at NAR. If you look at that Newsday video, there's a lot of discussion of school districts. And Bill Dedman, one of the journalists who launched that investigation by Newsday, has been working with NAR, and he spoke at a forum recently where he said invariably the first thing agents would talk about are school districts and what school districts you want to live in. And when you actually look at the Newsday video that they put out from their investigation, you had agents talking to folks about school districts who didn't even have children. And you hear one of the testers say, I don't have kids. They're like, well, yeah, but if you do have kids, you want to be in this school district. And they would have the school districts down to the specific boulevard. There might even be, a particular town you want to be in, but you want to be on this side of the street because that gets you into this school district. And then, what they're actually saying about school districts is even questionable, or how they're evaluating the school district. It might be test scores, but it often corresponds just simply with the demographics of the schools. So our schools are segregated, and that segregation too often is reinforcing the housing segregation and vice versa. And I'm from, Long Island, and so I know this dynamic. And it's very, very rigid and self-fulfilling. But agents can end up through these practices steering. I also just want to underscore what Nate was also saying too. It really is up to both agents and sellers to confront this. And actually, ACE's example stresses this too. And we've seen some cases recently where agents and sellers have stepped forward to talk about some of these issues. So let me give you just one example. Just this past week, there was a case in Rhode Island that was filed in federal court where a biracial couple made an offer on a home, and they were all set. The contract was even drawn up, and at the last minute, when the agents tendered the contract for the seller's signature, the seller noted that her name was misspelled, but then she also noted that the wife in the couple, that her first name was Ebony, and asked her agent, "Is this a Black woman?" And the agent responded, "Yes." And then the sellers decided they did not want to sell their home, and they insisted that it be taken off the market. Immediately, the seller's agent said, "I cannot work with you." And while they did take the home off the market, they cooperated with the buyer and the buyer's agent in providing an affidavit of what happened. And that is now part of the federal court filing. And so that is a good example of what agents are supposed to do, that they're not supposed to, abide by those wishes, but otherwise, make sure that the Fair Housing Act is upheld. So that's one example. The Washington Post just had a story last week just about pocket listings and how pocket listings can lead to discrimination. So in this particular case, a seller wrote into the real estate column to say that they put their home up for sale, and their agent decided to do a pocket listing and just make it available only to folks in the company and clients that they had a relationship with. And the seller realized pretty immediately that it was the agent's interest and perhaps the interest of some in the community to sell the home only to people who belong to a religious group that predominated in the community. And that I think they had maybe only one person come look at the property, but otherwise, this agent was trying to sell it to this group of people. And they realized what was happening and fired that agent, found another agent who would make it more widely available, and sold it instantly. So that is an example of sellers being aware and taking action right away. And I don't want to say, I think just as a final note on this, Maren mentioned buyer's agent issues, or love letter issues. And I think that's one of the areas where these can come into play, where parties may be attempting to communicate through love letters that they are, of a certain background or of a certain religion or ethnicity, where agents and sellers can conspire to make sure that the home is offered only to a certain group of people, and perpetuate the demographics of a community and exclude others. So there are lots of dangers, lots of pitfalls there, but it's going to really depend on brokers and agents and sellers to police themselves and police others in the industry.
Thank you. I'm just sitting here pondering on it on my own, and this is a really complicated thought process and conversation, right? Because for decades, I've been doing this 20 years myself. A love letter to a seller in a hot market was thought to be innocent, and hey, this is me and my dog, and I'm looking forward to popping out 3.5 babies there and raising my family like you did for 40 years here, right? But that's just how complicated this actually is, because it could be genuinely just that, but it could also be something very different, and we all need to be aware of that. So, all right, well, we're gonna move a slightly different trajectory for a moment, because I think that this is very important.
So Maren,
yes,
you hit on something that I think is just so important, and it's exactly the point of why our communities look the way that they do today. why we see the same level of segregation and lack of integration is because of that sentiment. It's like, okay, you know, let me sell the property to someone just like me. You know, let me keep this homogenous nature of the neighborhood together and intact. You know, all of those things are happening, and that's where that love letter sort of comes into play, because exactly what you just said, Marin, it's, you know, I want to raise 2.3 kids just like you. You know, I want to do all these things just like you. Often you'll have photos. You'll have photos that come with those letters. You know, it's like, hey, here's me and the kids, you know, and all that. So people see exactly who it is. And the goal there is so that the person who's selling the home kind of sees themselves, you know, in the person writing that letter, and that perpetuates the lack of integration.
Yeah,
well, you're exactly right.
And to underline that even further, you know, Nate mentioned photos, and I think not everyone has the same perspective when, you know, they think about photos. But for African Americans and other people of color, you know, whenever there's an application, you know, whether it's for a job or for a housing opportunity or anything, and, you know, you hear that, you know, a photo is desired, you know, that's where the discrimination could potentially occur. And I remember when Airbnb first came about, I just didn't want to deal with it, you know, because you know, they said you have to have a photo, and, you know, they wanted people to tell their story. And I'm like, okay, well, we've seen how this works. And sure enough, in due time, you know, folks would find out as African Americans that they were getting passed up for opportunities, and other people of color, and, you know, some very highly publicized cases involving Asians and others, you know, being denied opportunities because their race was abundantly known. So there's a lot of these things that many people might think are innocent. You know, you almost have to think of whether this works for, you know, every demographic group, or there are potential complications.
I call that unpacking the onion, right, guys?
Absolutely. And Brian, you mentioned, you know, Airbnb, and that is, I think, an example of someone who kind of got it right once it was wrong, because once they was sort of, you know, and maybe it was the lawsuits, I don't know, but once it came to light that these issues were happening, they said, hey, let's deal with this. And they hired, you know, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. They hired Laura Murphy from the ACLU to work on this, and they created the instant book system, which says, hey, you can book these, you know, you can, you know, book the unit before your profile is revealed. So no one knows your ethnicity, your race, or any of those things until it's already been agreed upon. And I thought that was a great move, and that's a great way to mitigate that and sort of level the playing field, so to speak, as it relates to creating a more equitable solution within their platform.
And I won't give Uber my photo either.
I don't blame you. But I think that so for me, this is extremely important for everybody on this audience, both now and watching later, understand that. And the analogy I gave, it's very true in my mind. It's crystallized. It's like an onion. An onion has so many layers. And every topic that we're discussing, or could even capitulate on, right, has so many layers to it. And that's where all of us face a challenge. And now the year of 2020, right? Let's shake it up, honestly, and actually look at it. Because things that people find innocuous are not to everyone. And things that people find every day and normal is not for everyone. And I think that that's really what we're tasked with right now. And I think we have a great day of reckoning upon us. So I think you're right about what happened with Airbnb. And I think it's time to take advantage and just grow and be better. Everybody's tired of hearing me say that, but it's really true. This is a chance to grow and just be better, because nobody's ever been perfect and no industry's ever been perfect. But we have the chance to impact this entire country with what we do, housing. And so this is why it matters so much. So my fellow Bics out there, this is why this matters so much right now, okay? And so with that, we got property managers on here. I know we do. And this matters to you guys too. So I'd love to touch on some fair housing issues hits or misses, if you will, in the property management arena and what they can be doing to specifically be better in the property management world.
Well, I'll give you another example of what I've experienced as far as in that arena, one that jumps out. You know, I had a client that called out of Brooklyn, New York. He lived downtown by the Manhattan Bridge. He was renting something out there for about $6,600 a month, okay? Called up here, wanted to do a rental. He says, I'm in the neighborhood of, you know, 4,000 to 5,000 a month. I'd love to be. Well, that's, I had to explain to him, that's high end here. I mean, you're probably executive level, you know? And so we went out, I went out and wanted to, he liked one he saw. I'm calling, now mind you, they don't know who he is, okay? I'm calling the agent, I get nothing. I mean, I don't get a response. They know I've showed the property. You know, I'm saying my guy is interested. And so the guy's like, I can't believe they're not in. It's been like a month now. It's not rented, you know, and I don't think people are chomping at the bit for, this particular property was around $4,500 a month. And so then we start talking and I say, you know, I wonder if it's something else, right? We always have that in the back of our mind. I wonder if it's something else. So what he does is he sends a letter, an email to the property manager. And he told me, I'm going to do this, Asa. I'm going to include my picture, right? And my, you know, he was an executive chairman of something. I can't remember. I'm going to include all of that. And I'm going to specifically tell them to call you because I'm interested in this property. And let's see if he calls you then. I got a call within 3 hours. So this guy, he went along, he said, I still want to do it. He goes in. They had said specifically that they did not want any type of upfit. He was allowed to do whatever he wanted to do with the property. And I know that's sort of on the seller, but I believe that the property manager is working for the seller, right? And so we're trying to figure out, you know, is this, you know, can we move? This guy happens to be a Jewish guy, you know what I'm saying? And he was like, I am 100% against what I believe just happened here. The question is, can we prove it? So I think one of the things with property management, as in the other arena with houses, it's difficult. You know, policies are only as strong as they're able to be enforced. And if there's not a way that, you know, attorneys are sort of going, oh, it's a stretch, you know, can we prove this? You know, you're sitting there really in your heart, you're feeling this happen, right? And I was not going to get a call back. But because this guy went ahead and sent his email straight directly to this person, he was in that home, you know, within a month, you know, and it took a month for the guy to even, you know, so it's just interesting, you know, how quickly he got that response once he was contacted and could see the picture of who was actually asking to go in there versus the person who was actually helping him. And so my thing is, I think as brokers and realtors, we need to make sure that we are being completely fair across the board, regardless of who you're dealing with. Because if there is somebody who wants to take this to the nth degree, I am sure a lot of us would be vulnerable.
Yeah, you know, it all often comes down to evidence, right? And a lot of these practices persist because people don't have the evidence. One of the, you know, takeaways from the Newsday investigation is a lot of those things that folks did would never have led to any kind of outcry, but for the fact that they did testing and they paired people with others and compared their experience and were able to present it together so people could see it. Really, in order for us to address this, you know, both the federal government in doing enforcement needs to do more of this testing. And then likewise within our industry, if companies care about this and want to do business with everyone, which, you know, should make companies more profitable, they can and should avail themselves of self-testing so they can actually see what's happening in their companies. So that's something that we have prioritized at NAR. We've actually invested significant resources in creating a self-testing program. We're starting to talk to companies and local and state associations about doing self-testing. so that we can self-correct. The government, to the extent that they do this work, will do it. And, it looks like media organizations are getting in on it as well. And so Newsday is not going to be the only example. And then speaking of the government, the government just in the last 2 weeks has brought a couple of cases involving testing, or I should say last 2 months. The Department of Justice brought another case in New York, just down the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway from where Asa described, in Staten Island, across the Verrazano Bridge, and involving a property management company where they were telling African Americans about fewer units or steering them to certain properties that were in more minority neighborhoods when they had properties in white neighborhoods that they would not tell them about, and vice versa with white clients. The Department of Justice has a testing unit, and they did the testing and proved this property management company was engaged in discrimination, or actually, I should say, they've alleged in U.S. District Court that this company is engaged in racial discrimination in property management. So that case is pending. But again, for testing, you might not be able to make that kind of case in federal court. And then the Department of Justice last week, it was either this week or last week, brought a case down in Mississippi involving testing. A private fair housing group went out and did some testing and alleged that another property manager was denying homes to African American applicants. And that is on their website. All of these, Department of Justice cases are on their website. That case was in Pearl, Mississippi, and I mentioned the other one being in Staten Island. So people should, take a look at this. But I think the one lesson, the consistent lesson we're seeing is that to the extent that government does this, that private nonprofits do it, and hopefully more within our industry, that's really the only way we're going to bring this to light and address it.
Yeah, and I think that it's from a property management, and actually not from just a property management standpoint, but it really where people get tripped up is not providing the equal professional services. So when you look at the NAR's equal professional services model, it's a great example of you treat everybody the same way, you document it, and as long as you're doing that, you're okay. And that's where people go, because people don't always have their systems in place. They may do something inadvertently differently with a protected class than they would with someone else. And it is completely innocent, but they find themselves potentially in violation of the Fair Housing Act because they did something differently than they did with someone else. And they didn't even they weren't maybe even consciously aware of that. And that's where the implicit bias and versus explicit bias comes into play. We don't know where we're treating people differently. We don't know the biases that we have and how that impacts us. And that's why documenting it and doing what we do every time, the same way, in a systematic way, is the only way we can ensure that we're treating everyone the same way. Because if we just think that we're treating everyone the same, then we're not going to be aware of we may not be aware that we've got these implicit biases that may have us doing certain things in some areas that we don't in other areas, or with certain people than we do with other people. It's just, it's human nature. And that's something we can't change. But what we can change is making sure that we have everything systematized.
Yeah, and it's a matter of calling it forth and being conscious of a tendency of all of us to do things like this. And that leads you then, whether it's written or internal, to sort of develop protocols to make sure that you're going through certain steps with everybody. Again, talking about Newsday, some of the agents would talk about crime and resale and schools with some customers and not with others. And if that was unconscious, I think sometimes they may even realize at some point that they're not having that conversation, say, with the person of color, maybe because they think, maybe that they think that person doesn't care about it, but also that they might be insulting that person because the communities they're describing often are communities, where people of color lived. And so they're not having that conversation necessarily. And so you have to be thinking about, am I saying the same things to each person and why? And so we at NAR have launched implicit bias training to get people thinking more about this. We have a preview of that training on our website. We actually have it at nar.realtor/bias override. And that's a 50-minute overview of what implicit bias is and how it applies in real estate. We're going to be doing 3-hour in-depth training for the real estate industry starting later this year and into next year. And then we're going to be doing some train the trainers so brokers can take advantage of this kind of training to get their agents thinking about how implicit bias can foul their transaction. So very, very important for people to be aware that this happens and how even inadvertently they could get into trouble.
Well, I think those tools are key. Honestly, right? Education is the key to revolution. It's key to everything. So I think that that's important. But you hit something, a couple of you hit something that actually I've made a note of as a broker in charge. And I think it would be fruitful for people to at least think about doing, to have actually a perfect example, first intro to a new buyer, right? What would your set questions be to every one of them? I mean, I just ran in my head 20 years of doing this, right? And if you had the exact same set of questions for every one of them, to your point, it's a system, it's in place. So you don't leave room for any implicit bias because it exists everywhere in every onion layer.
That's absolutely true. And, the example I gave earlier with the monkey, we went to that realtor, my guy wanted to go at that realtor and the builder, but he had the argument, he was like, I do this with I take you wherever your money, wherever you say you want to go. And if you have the money, you're qualified to do it. And he had examples. I mean, he says, look, and he used them as example, even the fact that I knew I had these emails. I did not listen to that. I still, since you said you wanted to live here and build here, I brought you here, which negated any type of, complaint or anything that my guy could do. He literally was like, I'm going to have to go through with this. We're halfway through it almost here. I'm going to have to go through it. I cannot bring a complaint against any of these people. And we don't know who's doing this over here. So the fact he had those systems in place, he had real life examples of him bringing so-called minorities into areas. He's like, I have a history of this. Showed that he, it protected him in a way. When you talk about risk management, I mean, he had protection in that particular instance because of the history he had built doing.
I think agents, who do well on fair housing, actually are upfront about their commitment. And there are different ways you can do it. You don't necessarily have to start talking about the Fair Housing Act or whatever, but you can inform clients that that they are the customer, and that you as an agent are not going to decide where they ought to live. If there are communities that you are interested in, that's that's my job to serve you, to help get find you those opportunities in those communities, and also just to tell customers, what kind of service they're entitled to. I think that would put me at ease as a person of color, if an agent openly, made known that they're going to show me everything that's available in a given area that, I select, and something along those lines, so that people understand that, they are seeing everything that's available, as opposed to, agent taking charge and deciding for you what you ought to see.
All right. Well, COVID, the great C word these days. We know we've talked a lot about it this year, like every day of our lives. and that will continue for the foreseeable future. So what impact has COVID had on the fair housing conversation? I know it has one. What does that look like? Anyone? Takers? Brian, I'm going to tap you on this one. Start us off.
Wow. Well, you know, what a strange career COVID has had already this year. You know, it's funny, in the very beginning of the year, when we were dealing with COVID, immediately there were disability related questions, you know, whether a person, you know, with COVID had a disability and how do you accommodate it. And we put out some guidance, you know, saying it very well could be, you know, it's new, we don't know yet, but it certainly is disabling, can even kill people. And that there are different steps that agents can take, but agents did not have to endanger themselves. You know, first priority is protect yourself from a contagious disease. But at the same time, if there were ways to do virtual showings and otherwise, you know, work with people, you know, here's what you do. We also saw it very early on that, you know, there was perceptions that Asians were carriers, and that there was, you know, mistreatment of Asian persons, Chinese persons in particular, and often other Asians who people perceived as Chinese. And so we were dealing with some of that, and even some, you know, perception that people in certain professions might be more susceptible, and folks were denied. Sometimes people were denied reasonable accommodations where they actually needed a live-in or, you know, a live-in aide or a caretaker, and out of abundant concerns, people with disabilities were sometimes denied that. So we saw a lot of that both in property management and in sales. Now I think we've seen a raging real estate market, and what you're kind of seeing is some of the traditional discrimination heightened in a way, where you may have, you know, a really, really hot property and people of color, or, you know, people, you know, who might be disproportionately folks of color, like FHA clients, just routinely overlooked or dismissed, not given the opportunities, or not shown certain properties even. And so I think you see some of the traditional discrimination on steroids, as people are sort of falling over themselves to get to a sale, making stereotypical assumptions about people or borrowers and the like.
Yeah, and I think that what COVID has done is it has allowed for more freestyling as it relates to how agents interact with their clients and with consumers. Meaning that, well, I may allow a showing today, but I'm not going to allow the showings tomorrow. So when you have that, sort of non-linear sort of protocol in place, then it creates a space for people being treated differently. And it may happen to be that those people who are being treated differently happen to be members of various protected classes. And what we know is that anytime there is adversity, whether we look at the Great Depression, the Great Recession, it's going to adversely impact members that have been disproportionately underserved historically. So COVID is another example of that, where we see that you just look at the case numbers, you look at the deaths, there's a disproportionate impact on the African American community, and that's a result of a variety of different things, and that also goes back to real estate. So as Brian stated, the sort of the market sort of being uber hot has just sort of perpetuates more of those discriminatory behaviors that could exist and that may sort of recess a little bit when it's a slower market, and sellers and such are in a position where they'll take any offer they can get. But when the market's hot and they have an opportunity to choose between a couple, then it creates a space where access can be denied, and that access that's denied is most often affecting members of protected classes.
So I hate to be the example person on this panel, but I have something here I think that really kind of speaks to this. I had a client who
Stories are great.
I had a client who really wanted to sell her home. She had inherited from her parents. They had bought it in the 40s, and you know, COVID hit obviously, and then you know you had this disproportionate amount of, you know, you had zip codes where you would say, oh, this one is a high case content in this zip code, and so she was really concerned. Like, I don't want any. I don't really want to put anybody in my house, and I don't want to sound racist. You know, when someone says that, you know, right? They know they're probably going to sound racist, right? So. It's just that, but I just kind of feel like people from this zip code are probably going to be coming for this. And, you know, is there a way that we can do it? And I was like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to do that. You know, if I'm going to do this for you, it's going to go to anyone who deems necessary to do it. And, you know, quite frankly, why would you want to curtail any interest in your home from anyone, you know? And so she went along with it. We put her house on the market, you know, where anyone could see. She went down to the beach. She said, I'm going to have them completely fumigate and spray this entire house before I come back into it. She got 176 showings in 2 days, 40 offers, some of them around 40 offers, and sold that property for $50,000 more than what she would want it. And two, a protected class that she was going to say, hey, I've got people, I know I could get it from this over here. I can get it from these people. But that's why I don't want to do it. I talked her into it. And the other thing about that, she got a $30,000 due diligence, which is, you know, you lose that if you don't buy the house in our state. So, you know, just me being able to kind of tell her I'm someone that doesn't stand for that. She told me in the end, you know, she was impressed with it. And she really decided to go down a road that she was not going to go down because she had people who had already offered on her home. We're in a hot market, right? But she said, you know what, you kind of changed my outlook on it. I decided to just put it out there in the open market for anybody. I'm 50,000 more, you know, richer to the, you know, because of it. And, you know, I think my life has changed in the perspective that I have, you know, for the duration. So that's an example I'll give of how COVID came in and really kind of scared her based on, you know, demographics of where, and people who supposedly had more propensity to have the disease, right? Could have affected the amount of money that she put in her pocket. But having someone who, you know, fortunate in having someone who was like, that's ridiculous. There's no way I'm doing that, you know, and but you shouldn't want to, you know, and it opened up her eyes for her to do the right thing and benefit because of it.
And, you know, those are the kinds of stories people need to hear. If you know, in the new year, I'm really all about cataloging these stories to help people appreciate, you know, how they personally prosper by following the fair housing laws, but also how our economy prospers. That's one of the stories I would love to include. People need to understand, you know, we're not talking about charity. We're not talking about, you know, inclusiveness just, you know, on the side or something. We're saying this is integral to the market, that discrimination is an artificial constriction of the market. And if we can get rid of it, everyone thrives. So thank you, Asa. I really appreciate that story. I'll remember it.
All right, guys. I could frankly keep barraging this panel with questions all day, but we're drawing to the end of where I understand everybody's ADHD attention span can function in. So I want to dig in really quickly before we wrap on something that I think is so important. I know we at NC Realtors have for the past several years been doing a real heavy focus and push on diversity and inclusion. And so I completely agree with education's key, and we're getting there, and slowly but surely, right? But I'd love to know from each one of you, maybe one thing, if you could rank it in your top wishes of being intentional here, right? Being intentional within our firms from the bottom up. How do we do this? How do we do a better job of it? Somebody just take it away. Your initial firm thought.
Well, so you said intentional, and you know, I think that's where it really starts. Is if we are not intentionally inclusive, then we're unintentionally exclusive. And that is really, I think, the point that I would like for everyone to take away. If you look around your office, if you look around your association, and you don't see much diversity, there's a reason for that. And it's not because you have said, I don't want any people of color in this office, but you've not created an environment where people feel welcome and included. And that's what's critically important. It's not about taking down the sign that said, you know, whites only. It's about putting up different sides that speak to the inclusion. And until we do that, which we've not done in our country, until we do that, we're going to continue to perpetuate these same sort of the same sort of segregated environments that we've been existing in over the last couple hundred years.
I agree 100% with that. And to just piggyback on that, you know, I've always believed that what you focus on expands, right? And so if you want this to be an environment that's fair and equitable to everyone, that has to become the focus of your brokerage. It has to become the focus of your brokers at your brokerage. You have to actually pay attention and use intentionality, as Nate said. And if you keep that in the forefront, it becomes the accepted norm. And here we are, we're doing as best as we can at addressing this issue.
And I might borrow Nate's phrase, I like that, and just adapt it and say, you know, if you're not intentionally aware, you can be unintentionally clueless. That we need to be aware of these issues in order to begin to address them. And we have to lean in and accept that you may not know precisely how fair housing issues play out. I know when I started with NAR a year ago, you know, many people said, you know, the big challenge with getting people's attention on fair housing and getting them into fair housing seminars and things is like everyone believes they know it. And if they knew it, you know, and we're following it, we wouldn't have these issues still today. So it's evident folks don't totally know it. You know, the implicit bias training is there. I gave you the site for that earlier because we don't know it. And so I think a big first step is just kind of acknowledging we can learn more. And if we are intentional in that awareness, we can make progress. So what I said about having, like, you know, an opening speech with clients that sets the stage so that people appreciate that you are going to treat them fairly. I think that's important. Or you could have even a brochure or something you hand folks and just say, you know, just want to let you know, you know, I provide equal professional service to everyone. You know, I provide this document to everyone, so they know that. Do something so that you are setting the stage, at least in terms of your intentions. And if I could make a plug for something that NAR just released today, we released a new training platform called Fairhaven, which is actually an immersive training simulation where you visit, or rather you're an agent in this town called Fairhaven, where you are navigating different real estate transactions. And they're challenging, and you're faced with different fair housing issues. And I was very pleased that Brian Copeland, an agent in Nashville, a broker in Nashville, put on his Facebook page today that he ran through the simulation and loved it and found it, you know, was really helpful and realistic. He said he expected the scenarios to be cheesy, but they were actually really engaging and useful. And so we did our best with this to present folks with real life scenarios, some of them based on real life scenarios, and different pathways they can go down. They're trying to sell homes as fast as they can within a certain period of time, so that you'll start thinking. And I'll say, you know, even though I've been in this work for 30 years, some of the situations were really challenging, you know. So that's what we need to do. We need to challenge our ideas, and that's how we develop our muscles to do better.
And I'm going to give a plug for it as well. I posted at all of you who are my friends on social media. I posted a link to it this morning on Facebook. You need to go do it. I think that it's not something people need to be worried about taking. God forbid people tracking it, seeing your answers. So tell people not to freak out about that. It's not something they have to worry about. Go do it. It doesn't take long, and it's really important. It's really important for us to flip our rocks. We got to flip our rocks, guys, and look underneath them. All right. So we've talked about a lot today. And I have to extend my sincere thanks to the three of you, number one, because I honestly can't imagine running this panel without you three on it with me right now, because you're trustworthy and honest, and you understand that people all are complicated. And this is a complicated conversation that we have to have. It's current and relevant. So we're not done with it yet. One, we're going to send out an email after this with the recording and links to a bunch of stuff, right? Just stuff, resources, tests you could take, you name it. It's going to come out to everyone. But then on December 2nd, Nate's going to be back with us. He's going to be talking to our whole membership, okay? He's going to really dig into the history of fair housing and talk to all realtors about what they really need to know about it. This is going to be super important. So make sure you resend that link out when we send it to you. And we're going to give you ample opportunity. We're going to send it in today's education roundup email, and we'll prompt it again between now and then. So with that, I want to say thank you for your time, all my fellow Bics out there. Thank you three, as usual, for everything. And let us know if you need anything. Remember, unpack this, guys. Watch it again and share it. It matters. Thanks all. And everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Stay safe and healthy out there.